I'm showing 4:01 p.m., so we'll go ahead and get started. My name is Mike Ross, Senior Vice President for Government Affairs and Public Relations at Little Rock-based Southwest Power Pool. As many of you know, SPP manages the electric grid and wholesale electric market, plans transmission for all or part of 14 states. We're one of 7 regional transmission organizations designated by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission in the United States. We appreciate your interest and your participation as we manage this winter weather event. I would say an unprecedented winter weather event where we've had temperatures below zero throughout our entire 14-state region. We're joined today by Barbara Sugg, the President and Chief Executive Officer, and also Lanny Nickel, who is the Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer. And our current status, the good news is we're in Energy Emergency Alert Level 1. No coordinated temporary interruption of service today. However, we are continuing with public appeals to conserve energy. Certainly not out of the woods yet. And with that, I'll turn to Barbara Sugg, the President and CEO of Southwest Power Pool, for some comments.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks everybody that joined us today. I know it's been a trying week for all of us and for all of you, and for all of your customers and your neighbors. And you know, this has been a very unprecedented week. I know people are kind of tired of the word unprecedented, but it does really apply here. The temperatures, the load, the entire situation has just been a real challenge for all of us, of course. But you know, interrupted loads, controlled outages like we've had to call on these last 2 days, yesterday and the day before. Yeah, I mentioned this yesterday. These are things that decisions that we don't take lightly. There's not a single megawatt that is not important to us. There's not a single customer or customer of our member companies that is not important to us. And so, you know, certainly any type of an outage is a last-ditch effort to protect the integrity of the transmission grid and to really prevent what could be a really dire situation where we have widespread blackouts that are uncontrolled and damaging to the system, and then it takes a lot of time to bring people back on. It is always unfortunate to ever, you know, for any utility company ever to have to take an outage, an intentional outage with their customers. And we haven't been in this boat before, and we're fortunate that we hadn't been in this boat before where we had to take outages or give orders to take outages within our region. So it's been trying for us because we do every single thing we can do to try to prevent getting to the stage where an outage is necessary. But please know that outages that are taken are absolutely necessary to protect the grid at that point in time when the conditions are such that too much load is devastating. So Mike mentioned we're still in an Energy Emergency Alert Level 1. There are 3 levels. I think Lanny will probably go over that a little bit more. But Level 1 really is just, it is the lowest level. That's good. The highest level is a 3, and that ultimately is where we start seeing the need to, potentially anyway, the need to call for interruptions. Mike mentioned the need for continued conservation. Turning off some lights and you know, maybe running the dishwasher at a different time or doing laundry at a different time when the load is really high. I am absolutely positive that those conservation efforts help to minimize the amount of time that we actually were in these outage situations. So we also coordinate with a lot of people. And so another reason that we've been able to minimize these windows of outage period as small as we have is through the coordination with all of our member companies and the coordination that they have with all of you, the conservation efforts, the work that we do with the energy suppliers, the relationships that we have with the utility companies in neighboring regions outside of Southwest Power Pool that may have extra generation at any one given point in time that they can fill into our region, and we can import that and help to cover. All of those types of coordinated events and work with our neighbors has played a huge role in us being able to limit these outages to the times that we have limited them. We're not out of the woods yet. The deep freeze is still here. It is still we are still in a situation where across our 14-state footprint, we have higher loads than we would ever have at this time of year. And that presents challenges for us that we are still working through. I'm very proud of not just our team, but all of you, and how people have really stepped up to help in minimizing the potential outcomes. So with that, I'll pass it back to Mike, and I'll stick around to help answer any questions that you may have at the end.
Thanks, Barbara. And up next is Lanny Nickel, our Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer at Southwest Power Pool. Lanny?
Well, thank you, Mike. And, I don't really want to go all the way back to about a week and a half ago when we really began to start paying attention and preparing for this cold weather event. I will go, because a lot of you have already heard that, but I will go back to really Sunday morning, which is when we issued our first announcement of an energy emergency alert, which was a level 1 at the time. That's when we began to ask our member utilities to ask their customers to conserve energy. And those public appeals, in my mind, were very helpful. I believe we saw almost immediate impact because by the time Monday morning rolled around, which is when we were projecting a peak of over 45,000 megawatts for wintertime conditions, we actually ended up only experiencing 43,000, a little over 43,000 megawatts. So almost a 2,000 megawatt reduction that I believe largely can be attributed to the fact that consumers began to voluntarily reduce their usage. And that was certainly helpful to us. As you recall, if you've been paying attention to these press conferences over the last couple of days, we did ultimately on Monday have to begin issuing directions to our utility members to start performing their emergency plans for rotating interruptions of service. That on Monday, that call for interruptions of service across the region, the 14-state region, only amounted to about 1.5% of our regional consumption at that time. And it lasted for 50 minutes. Tuesday, we began with a little more of an extreme event because load consumption was expected to be higher that day as temperatures across the footprint continued to drop. And we were projecting even higher load for Tuesday. And as a result of that, as well as other events occurring across the system, generation not being as available as it had been on Monday, and then imports that we have been blessed to rely upon Monday weren't quite as great as on Tuesday. And so we ended up having to issue directives to interrupt about 6.5% of our load on Tuesday. And that lasted about 3 hours and 21 minutes. These are actions we don't want to take. We've said that. We'll continue to remind you. These are last resort actions. We've taken all other steps we can do. We direct all available generation that can come online to come online. We direct them to do that and purchase fuel no matter what that cost is. We direct and ask for assistance from our neighbors, and we do all of that at the same time while trying to make sure that supply and demand are balanced, and at the same time while trying to make sure that transmission system infrastructure is being properly managed within safe operating limits. But at the point when demand exceeds supply, we have to correct that. We have to do it nearly immediately, because if we don't, the system will begin to automatically correct that for us. And when that happens, cascading outages occur. When a generator trips offline because it has to do that to prevent further damage, that will have an impact to other generators on the system. Those generators begin to trip. And as more and more generators begin to trip in an uncontrolled fashion, load can no longer be served. And we have nothing we can do at that point. When that begins to happen, it happens in milliseconds. And manual operators we just can't intervene manually. Operators can't stop that when we get to that point. So everything we've done has been done to protect against far more extreme events from occurring that impact many more consumers and impact them in a much deeper, more impactful, longer lasting way. 30 minutes or 50 minutes of outage on Monday, 3 hours and 21 minutes of outage on Tuesday that affected up to 6.5% of our load. That was doing everything we could do to try to continue to keep the lights on for as many people as we could in a very responsible way. As Mike mentioned today has been much better, and we hope that continues. And we hope that continues through tomorrow. It appears, based on our best projections, that we could very well be in an emergency alert level 2 tonight. Again, a level 2 does not mean we're going to shed load. It's just simply emphasizing the need for consumers to voluntarily reduce consumption. But we could very well be there later tonight and throughout the night. And then maybe early into the morning tomorrow. We do hope by the end of the day tomorrow that given weather conditions and load continuing to drop, that we could very, very well be out of this situation entirely and hope to see that by Friday. We're going to continue to do the best we can, and we're working as well as we can with our members. I know they have been talking to us just every hour, practically every minute we talk to them, and our neighbors as well. And without that interconnected system and network of neighbors helping each other out, this situation could have been a lot worse. And I know that's hard to hear if you've been affected by it, and we don't want anybody to be affected by it. But if you have been, I know that's hard to hear. This could have been worse. But it could be. I mean, that's just the truth of the situation. It could have been worse, and we're continuing to work on it. We're continuing to try to make this as painless as possible, and we hope to be out of it very soon.
Thank you, Lanny. And so for those on the phone, if you have a question, you can ask us in the chat or the raise hand feature. If you're not familiar with the raise hand feature, if you open the participant box, toward the bottom of that, there's a little hand. And if you click that, your hand will be raised. Derek Wingfield with our corporate communications department is going to help me facilitate the question and answer part of this briefing. And Derek, but I tell you what, while you're getting some questions queued up, I've got one for Lanny, because I've heard this more than once. I think it would be good for you to address it. And some have asked, why not more advanced notice before we have a controlled temporary interruption of service? And what's really the difference between that and a blackout? Can you address that?
Yeah, well, so to answer the question about advanced notice, the approach we took was really to begin that advance notice on Sunday of this week, when we issued an alert to our members and asked them to inform their customers, which I'm sure they did. I know they did because I pay attention to their Twitter accounts and other social media that they use to begin to conserve energy. And that began on Sunday, well in advance of what ended up materializing on Monday morning. And in fact, again, as I said earlier, we think that helped. But that was the advance notice that we did give and that we found very useful and somewhat effective. So in terms of when we then have to proceed to issue curtailment instructions on a rotating basis, we'll wait as long as we possibly can to do that because we're trying to prevent that from happening. We're taking all actions we can to prevent that from happening. And it's only when we get to that last minute where load equals or demand equals supply that we then have to take the next step. And when we do, we tell our members very rapidly, they get the message and they begin to implement their plans, and those plans are implemented very quickly. We do that so that we can avoid the possibility of interrupting service prematurely that would last an even longer period of time that may not have even been needed. So that's why we take the approach we do. We're trying to do everything we can to prevent that from being the decision that we have to make.
Thanks, Lanny. And Derek, do we have some questions on the line?
We do, and I'll go to a couple of these that are already in the chat. I'm going to try and pick a couple that we might be able to answer kind of quickly. Steve Vacrot asks, how voluntary are these outages with respect to member utilities? Are there any consequences for utilities that don't participate?
Yes, there are consequences. If SPP and its role as what we refer to as the reliability coordinator, that is a distinct function. It's one of the several distinct functions that SPP performs. If the reliability coordinator directs a member utility to take action, that member utility is obligated to do so. And there are reliability standards that place this obligation on those members to follow those directions. By the way, those same reliability standards also place obligations on SPP to do what it has to do so that we can all work together to keep the lights on.
That's a good question. Good answer. Derek, what else do we have?
All right. Brian Grimmett is with KMUW in Wichita, and Brian notes that our summer peak is often much greater than SPP's winter peak. Why is it that it's more difficult to meet our peaks in the wintertime when we do so frequently in the summer?
That's another great question, and I'm glad it's asked because it gives us an opportunity to help really further the understanding of why this is such an extreme event for us and unprecedented. First, the assumption's correct. Summer peaks for SPP tend to be higher than our winter peaks, not by much. In fact, with the winter peak we just set on Tuesday of this week, that particular amount was only about 5,000 megawatts, or another way to think about it, a couple of percentage points less than our summer peak. So very close, but yet less. So think about the fact that in wintertime, consumers across the country rely on gas to provide heating and as a source of fuel in their residential homes. At the same time, nearly half of what SPP needed, probably about 40% of what SPP needed from a generation supply perspective during this same week were gas fuel generators. The same fuel that we need to provide you electricity is the same fuel that many of you are using to provide your home's heat. The supply of gas is very constrained when these conditions collide, and that's what happened. We needed gas to run generation. We also needed gas for our local consumers for heating purposes, and that's what causes the strain in wintertime that we don't see in the summertime. The average residential consumer doesn't use gas in the summertime nearly as much as it does in the wintertime, which again happens to be when we need gas generators to run, as well as coal, and as well as wind, and as well as all other forms of fuel that are available to supply the generators that we need to run.
Thanks, Lanny. One more quick question from the chat, and then we've got several people with their hands raised on the phone. This came from Michael Mahoney, who's with KMBC TV in Kansas City, who notes the frequency with which we have used the word unprecedented. He said, a power regulator told me that no one has ever experienced something like this in the history of utility regulation. He notes that that is a quote, and asks, do we agree with that?
Absolutely. I mean, we've been coordinating power at Southwest Power Pool since 1941. And as an RTO, we have never before been in a position to do a coordinated temporary interruption of service.
That's true, Mike.
Particularly not across the entire region.
That's true. But I interpreted the question, has it ever happened in our industry? And I don't think we can answer that. I am not familiar with entities like Southwest Power Pool or other reliability coordinators, say on the East Coast or on the West Coast, and under different circumstances, have they ever had to what we call shed load like this? You know, we're not prepared to answer that. We know we have never had to do it. It has never happened in our region. And so that's, you know, Mike's very definitive about that. He's absolutely correct. That pertains to our region. We can't really speak to whether anybody else has ever had to.
Yeah. And one other point I would add to that, the service interruptions that we have directed have been a result of an imbalance between generation supply and electric consumption. There often are interruptions of service that occur for many other reasons, and in some cases outside of SPP's control. If, for example, the power line that feeds the transformer just right outside your home ices up and trips, those outages occur. They occur frequently. They occur for different reasons, whether it be icing, whether it be wind, whether a car drives into the power line pole. There are many reasons why outages occur, and sometimes they occur and they're very limited in scope. They only affect a few customers. Sometimes they occur and they affect many customers. This was unprecedented in the sense, at least for SPP, that it was something that had to be borne across the entire region in terms of the fix to solve the problem.
Yeah, I was speaking on behalf of SPP. I mean, it's historic for us. It's unprecedented for us. But, you know, if you look back in 2003, the blackout in the Northeast, that was very significant. It lasted several days, stretched into Canada, and led to Congress passing the Energy Policy Act of 2005. But from our perspective, from our region, from SPP, it's certainly been historic for us.
And by the way, Mike, that event you spoke of in 2003 that affected the Northeast region was a result of an uncontrolled, unexpected series of events that ended up being quite costly, both in terms of loss of life and just in terms of financial impacts.
Absolutely. All right, Derek, what else do we have?
All right, we'll take our first call from the phone, and that will go to Kasia Mysek. Kasia, I'm going to unmute your line, and go ahead, please.
Hi. Yeah, yesterday y'all were saying the situation was still dire last night, and demand was close to about 46 gigawatts in the morning, but it looks like it came in much lower than that, about 3,000 gigawatts lower. So do you attribute that to conservation by users, or was that imports from neighbors? Can you explain a little bit more about how you were able to curtail what demand was showing to prevent any rotating outages last night?
Great question, Kasha. And my response is going to be you can attribute several factors to that, not the least of which is because of the voluntary reduction. So again, we very much appreciate that. We do think that attributed a significant amount of reduction in load that we saw this morning. We also continued to be the beneficiaries of energy transfers between our neighbors and us, and that helped out as well.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kasha. We're going to go next to Rick Marinan with Fox 23. Rick, your line is now open.
Hi, I got a notification from the Grand River Dam Authority out here, and they said they're plugged into y'all. And they said that they were going to open up more floodgates to try to create more hydroelectricity. Is that rare that you would ask an authority that has floodgates and dams to open them up because of an emergency, or is that standard procedure? I heard a lot of natural gas, coal, solar, and wind, but this was the first time I heard anything about opening floodgates on a river and draining a lake. Thank you.
Rick, I would characterize that as pretty rare. It's not something that has we would. I mean, that is an option, and if it's an option that's available and can be done safely, again, the GRDA works very closely with the Corps. They have to make sure they can do whatever they do safely. But we would ask if there's anything you can do, please do it. And that appears to be what happened in that situation.
If I can ask for a quick clarification, Lanny, you said something about if you did not do these rolling outages, you would have breakers popping and things like that. Are you talking about like explosions and fire, like actual physical damage to the grid?
Rick, a lot of that depends on how it unfolds. I don't know that that's what would happen. In a frequency event, which means, in order for us to continue to provide electricity at 60 hertz, we have to make sure we maintain perfect balance between supply and demand. And generating plants are protected against extreme, or well, maybe not extreme, but large deviations from what they're designed to be able to handle, and they would trip. I wouldn't expect that to create a fire just because the protection equipment in those substations and at those plants operated the way they were supposed to. More than likely, if a fire occurred, loud pops as you described it, more than likely that would be because of some malfunction of equipment.
Thank you.
Let me add one more comment on the hydro question. We talked about the coordination, with our neighbors and within our region, and I know that one of the things that helped to minimize the potential outages was additional hydro that the Western Area Power Administration was able to provide after coordination with the U.S. Corps of Engineers. And I think so they were certainly producing more hydro. Now, opening a floodgate to do it, I don't know how they produced more hydro than what they had planned. I would be out of school there on how that works, and I don't know for sure about GRDA. But hydro is definitely one of our important generation mixes, generation types.
That's a good segue to several questions that have been asked in the chat that have to do with different fuel types. And I'm just going to read a couple of these. I'm cherry picking and paraphrasing. Brian Johnson put it this way: how much of this happened because we now rely on green energy? I know I saw someone else cite comments by Nebraska's governor that called this unacceptable and seems to place some of the blame on renewable energy. Others have just asked about our fuel mix and how it might have evolved over the course of this event. So anything you could say, any more commentary on different fuel types and how they have performed throughout this event?
Let me just say, we don't choose the kind of generation that's built. We don't own the generation. We are required to do studies on how it would reliably connect to the grid, but it's up to those who own the generators working with their state regulators to determine what type of generation is built. We have a very diversified fuel mix. About a third of our energy is wind, about a third is natural gas, about a third is coal. And Lanny, you or Barbara want to add to that? We're required to be fuel agnostic because we facilitate the wholesale electric market. And so we don't pick the winners and losers. We don't pick the energy source. It's the market. It's the market that does.
Yeah, Mike's absolutely right. And, you know, the question was, what do you think the impact has been as a result of the fuel mix changes and how has it performed? You know, as far as what I can see, wind production, as an example, has performed as we have forecasted on the minute by minute, the hour by hour, and the day by day basis. So we've been pretty blessed in that regard. Granted, the wind production that has been generated is lower than what you would see in a really, really windy day, but that wasn't expected for this time of year. We didn't expect to have a really, really windy day on a sub-0 degree temperature day. And so we've been blessed, at least in that regard, that our tools have been working very well for us. And for example, wind production has generated pretty close to what we have been predicting. You know, gas supply has been a concern for us throughout this entire event. But you know, as long as gas is available, our utility operators that own those gas generators have been making them available and have been generating. Same thing with coal. If coal's available and it's not frozen up, the coal power plants have been producing as much as they can and pursuant to our direction to operate. And we've already spoken about the hydro, so I apologize I didn't cover the hydro part, but you know, hydro has also helped in many ways.
I know we're running short on time now. There is one more question that I think it'll give us a good place to wrap things up. And a couple of people have asked about this different ways. So that has to do with the role that particular generators or particular cities, municipalities play in the larger context of SPP. Aaron, I think Sanderford, I hope I've gotten your name right. Sanderford, yeah, Aaron Sanderford asked. You know, people in his region may not understand why a controlled outage was necessary when a power plant in their region was producing more power than they needed. And so, and someone else cited, you know, there may be plans by a municipal to build a new power plant just to provide power to their city. So how does that fit in? If you've got a power plant, it produces more power than you need to serve the population where you live. What's the value of participating in a power pool like SPP, and what can that mean in an event like this?
So that's a great question, and there's a lot behind it. I will do the best I can to try to unpack it, and we'll hopefully rely a little bit on Barbara and Mike to the extent they can help out. But, you know, I'll just say it this way. Today's excess that you might have as a particular power producer could very easily not be available tomorrow, and you need somebody else's excess. And that's where our regional function really helps. I can tell you, if an individual utility were on their own and weren't connected and weren't dependent on other people to help them out, there will come a time when that utility is going to need help. And that's the benefit of being interconnected. It's the benefit of being interdependent, because your excess today is going to be your deficiency tomorrow. And we help make sure that all of that gets facilitated, so that if North Dakota, as an example, has excess energy that Louisiana needs, we get it there. Because tomorrow, Louisiana may have excess energy that North Dakota needs.
So Lanny, what I would add to that is, on top of that, being part of the region with as many utilities as we have within the Southwest Power Pool footprint across 14 states, when there is a need like this one to take a controlled outage, that outage is spread across everybody. Every utility that participates in SPP that serves load, it takes a piece of that outage, so that the outage is not nearly as devastating as it would, as widespread as it would be in just a local area. And so if a utility has, say, 20% of our total consumption, then that utility, even if the most extreme conditions are happening in their area, they only have to take 20% of the outage, because they're 20% of the load. And Lanny's right. There's plenty of times throughout the year where more power is generated in one part of the region than in another, and all of that feeds into our wholesale energy market that makes decisions about not just what's the most reliable source of energy to be generated, but also what's the most affordable. And that balance of affordability and reliability are so important. Now, this week it's all about reliability. We knew that we needed just as much generation as we could get, and we also relied on our neighbors to help on the east and on the west, and man, did they step up. And on top of that, our customers, our member companies' customers, individual consumers stepped up and did their part as best they could. And we could tell, as I mentioned at the beginning, these outages would have been much more significant and likely longer lasting had the consumers not conserved as much as they did during those times that the need was at its highest, where that tipping point hits when supply begins to exceed, demand begins to exceed supply. Hope that answers your question.
I'll wrap that question up with this response to go with what Lanny and Barbara shared. And I've heard our member company do this very well and very eloquently. But one of our member companies, they had a fire that shut down a very large generating plant, and it was a terrible event where a worker was killed. And they have said that if they were not part of a regional transmission organization, had they not been part of SPP, a number of folks in their service area would have lost power for an extended period of time. But yet they were able to rely on their neighbors because of the diverse fuel source and the many generators we have within the region. That's just one real life example, I think. Any other questions, Derek?
Let me check if we have time for another. I know we've gotten quite a few. Let me ask this. Michael Mahoney, I think this was early on, so I know Michael's been waiting quite a long time. He asked if we had any way to quantify how close we came to the point of a cascading shutdown.
Well, a lot of the ability to answer that question depends on postmortem analysis that will be done. We right now we're focused on keeping the lights on, and we'll continue to focus on that until we get out of this event. But we will be doing a lot of analysis to figure that out in much more detail. I can tell you though that if we had let the imbalance continue to accrue much longer than 10 or 15 minutes, that's when the system can take over and when it can begin to act on its own. So that's why it's so important to make sure that we can take these actions quickly and effectively.
All right. Well, I really want to thank everybody for participating with us today. We really appreciate the time you've given us, and we respect that. And I know many of you have press deadlines to make, and so just know that as events unfold and if things change, we'll be in touch. And please continue to help us get the word out to encourage people to conserve electricity. We thank you all very much. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.